Welcome to In the News for April the 8th, 2022. I am Brett Burney from appsinlaw.com.
This is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Brett, I see that the background behind you is the Swiss Alps. Do not step into a crevice. We'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Nice tease, though. I like that. So a couple of announcements quickly. You did a great job of covering a bunch of stuff this week, Jeff. But one of the things that I know that you and I have been anticipating is what we call affectionately Dub, but it is WWDC, which I think stands for Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference. We have this almost every summer. We've been waiting for the dates, and it finally happened this past week. The announcement was made.
Yeah, so June 6th is when it starts. And the reason that matters for those of us that are interested in iPhones and related technology is that that has been the date when Apple previews its upcoming operating system, specifically the iOS operating system. So, we're using iOS 15 now. And in fact, I hear a rumor that there might be one more update to iOS 15 because they've got one in beta. But, iOS 16 will be previewed in April, May. So we're just 2 months from now. In 2 months, we'll get a preview and the beta will be available soon. And we'll get to see what new treats Apple has in store for iOS 16. So I'm excited about that. And then at the same time, it may be some other product announcements too. I don't expect an iPhone or an iPad announcement. The big rumor is that Apple's going to preview its Mac Pro high-end machine, which is probably going to be outside of the cost range for most folks, but unless you're really a professional. But it's always exciting, so it'll be neat. It'll be online only again, just like the last couple of years, with one exception, which is that for that keynote on June 6th, they're going to allow certain people to be there in person, which is interesting. Yeah. So that makes me think that it's not going to be one of these pre-recorded, very slick videos like before. I suspect it's going to be, Tim Cook on stage of the Steve Jobs Theater on Apple's campus in Cupertino, California, and other people coming on stage. So it'll be more of the keynotes that we were used to for many, many, many years.
Yeah, the only thing that maybe underscores your potential thought on the announcement of a hardware is one of the main reasons they would have somebody or folks come on campus, like in a physical location, is because typically after a big announcement, they let people go into like a side room. I've never been, but I've just seen lots of pictures, where they can actually get hands on some of the new products and test them out. So some people have been speculating that might be one of the things, which would kind of put a check mark in the product, an actual product. But anyway, we'll be talking about this. I'm sure certainly in a couple of months and maybe leading up to it, but it was an interesting little post announcement. Something we talked about last week, which was taking the interwebs by storm. There was a video that went viral last week, which was your lovely little in the know tip last week, Jeff. But I am thrilled to know that our friend Dan Moren from Six Colors gave a little more explanation behind the really magical looking tip of copying and pasting photos from like an iPhone to an iPad. Why don't you explain what had happened, and then maybe we can explain how Dan talks about it here.
Yeah, I mean, what I mentioned last week is this, and I didn't realize it was a viral video. I just saw it myself, and apparently everybody else saw it too.
You're ahead of your time.
Michael Tobin did such a nice job of pinching with his fingers on one device's iPhone, and then moving his hand over to his iPad, and then reverse pinching, and it just pastes a picture on the iPad. And I tell you what, it actually works. I mean, as I said in my post this morning, I was doing some stuff yesterday with my iPad, and I took a picture of something quickly with my iPhone, and I could have waited for my iPhone to sync the photo up to the iCloud and then back to my iPad, but I didn't want to wait for that. So I just, I just pinched and copied it, and I pasted it right there in my notebook in GoodNotes, and I was able to use the picture right away. So it's a cute little feature. But what Dan Moren in this article, which I thought was interesting, is he sort of said, where did this come from? And he said it's actually two different things. One of them was back in 2016. So gosh, 6 years ago, when Apple had iOS 10. That is what introduced something called Universal Clipboard. Which is the idea of a shared clipboard between multiple devices that are all sharing the same ID, which in my experience is not 100%. I still have times that it doesn't work when I think it should. but it
Yes.
usually, and I've also had times when it works and I didn't want it to. Like I'm using two things at once, and I have something copied on my Mac, and then I'm using my iPad and I paste. I'm like, no, I didn't want that. I meant to. I wanted to paste.
Didn't want that.
Previously here. That happens very, very rarely, but it's happened once or twice. But so that's how that comes from. And then the gestures with the three fingers, and you pointed out last week that it's the three finger gesture that came out in 2019 in iOS 13. So it's just interesting that, different technologies introduced at completely different times, but you put them together and it's something that is both useful and also sort of a pretty cool party trick. So
it's a very cool party trick. I mean, it does look magical when you're doing it. The last thing that Dan pointed out here, which I think is kind of telling, and it's a little, well, I say disturbing. It's not that big of a deal, but to me, it's like I wish things like this would be more aware. Like people could be more aware of them. Dan
more accessible.
Here,
yeah. You just don't know it's there, right?
Even Dan says here in this article, he goes, I admit I've rarely thought about the copy and paste gestures since iOS 13 came out. And, you and I talk about this quite a bit. So I know about the gestures, but most people just go back to most people I observe just don't even use the new gestures. And in fact, myself, sometimes the old copy and paste way where I have to tap and hold a finger, to bring up that little edit additional secondary menu. I sometimes just resort to that because it's just the way that I used to do it. I don't even think about the three finger stuff all the time. I love that Apple puts these little, they're kind of quasi Easter eggs. They're things that you can find out, but when somebody kind of goes viral and, shows it in the way that this really cute TikTok video did, it really kind of helps to uncover some of that. So that's some great stuff.
Yeah, and I want to highlight something that you just said, just to make sure that people catch it. One of the really, really useful gestures that I'm sure it's easy to forget about is, speaking about three fingers, if you take three fingers and tap them when you're on your iPad or on your iPhone, anytime that you're in sort of an edit mode, you're writing a document, you're in a notes or something like that, anytime that you could be doing a cut or paste, if you just take your three fingers and just tap them on the screen, a little menu comes at the top of the screen of your iPad or your iPhone, and it's got like it has all the buttons. Not all of them. The ones that you can't use will be grayed out, but you can do undo, cut, copy, paste, redo. And so it's a really useful way to just tap and then choose which one of those controls you want. So don't forget about that one. It's a gesture that, again, because it's not right there in front of you, nothing is reminding you all the time that you can do this three finger tap. But then once you start to make it part of your habit, it's really useful.
And that's a three finger tap. Right. So you do three fingers, whether it's like your middle finger and forefinger.
You
and
pick
thumb,
the fingers.
You pick the fingers you want to use, and it'll work. We guarantee it. There were some updates that Apple made this past week to their apps. We a lot of times talk about Microsoft Office and, of course, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. But a lot of our listeners know, of course, that Apple has some similar applications, Pages for word processing, Numbers for
spreadsheets,
crunchy numbers, right, in spreadsheets, and Keynote for presentations. And there was one feature I know that you highlighted here, Jeff, that was just absolutely critical to your workflow here, and that was in Keynote.
Yeah, I was making fun of the fact that you can now adjust font sizes precisely up to 2 decimal points. But these apps, Apple's productivity apps, which used to be called iWork, I don't know if they still call them that, because they used to bundle them together in the old days. I don't know that they do that anymore. But it's funny because Pages is not as good as Microsoft Word, and yet in some ways it's a little bit better. But it's just nice to have a built-in option there that you can get, because I believe these are all free apps. And Numbers, although Excel is technically more powerful, if you're an accountant or something like that, the things, Numbers can do, maybe it's 90% of what Excel does, but it's 100% of anything that I would ever want to do. Numbers is very powerful. And I actually think that Numbers is better than Excel when it comes to creating graphs, charts, sort of when it comes to taking the numbers and putting them in a graphical form. I use it all the time. In fact, even if I'm using my PC at work, I may have a spreadsheet in Excel, but I'll send it over to my iPad and put it in Numbers because numbers can read Excel files, and then use my, create my chart there, and then just export it as a JPEG and put it back on my PC, because I think it does a prettier job. All of the charts and stuff you see on iPhone JD that I do over the year, every once in a while, are all done in numbers. But Keynote is the crown jewel, because that's the one that I think is much better than PowerPoint. I know PowerPoint's a huge thing for people, but everything about Keynote, even on a Mac, I think it works better, but especially on an iPad, Keynote is just, it works so well with touch and things like that. So the reason I say all of that is those have been around for a long time. And it's great that they're around. I'm glad that Apple has these alternatives, but I think it speaks to the maturity of these apps that, Keynote is such an important app. And yet the one or two updates that it made this time is like, being able to zoom in more. And then the silly thing about the font size. I'm sure there are more things that they could add that people would use, but I will tell you, Brett, I use Keynote often, and it does everything that I want. Again, I wouldn't turn down new features, but that just shows you that it is both incredibly powerful and pretty feature complete. And you could say the same thing about Microsoft Word, of course. Microsoft Word's been around since 1984, and Microsoft finds new ways to, innovate the ribbon and change things around. And, I just got an email the other day from a friend of mine who said that his Mac automatically updated to the new version of Microsoft Word, and now everything looks different. He can't understand it. So sometimes the updates are for better or worse. But so it's nice that the Apple's productivity apps are so feature complete. But it's also nice.
I agree. I usually, when I give a presentation, I have a slide, and I say between Word and Pages, I always use Word. I rarely ever use Pages. Between Numbers and Excel, I use them both. Excel, if there's an Excel spreadsheet, even though, like you said, Numbers can open Excel. But if I get a CSV file, which is usually a comment delimited file, and I have to deal with those a lot of times in my day-to-day, I find that Numbers does a much better job opening a CSV file than in Excel, or I just prefer it. So I use both of those. Between PowerPoint and Keynote, I always use Keynote. Yeah. I don't mind PowerPoint. I will use it. I know how to use it, but man, I can just make Keynote sing so much better anytime I give a presentation. And so it's just using, both of those apps and living in both of those worlds. But you alluded to this just quickly. The good thing that Apple did, I think, is all of these apps can open the Microsoft equivalent. Pages can open Word documents, Numbers can open Excel spreadsheets, Keynote can open PowerPoint presentations. Sometimes the files get a little squirrely, just because of the file fidelity going back and forth. But I always thought Apple was brilliant in allowing you to do that, because if somebody sends me a PowerPoint file, I would usually open that in Keynote and edit in Keynote, just because I prefer using that and all of the options within Keynote.
And the flip is true too, Brett. I think I mentioned this before. I will, when I do presentations, even if I'm going to end up having to do it from a PC, I will often do the whole darn thing in Keynote on my iPad. And then as a last step, I will export from Keynote into PowerPoint. And then you still need to take a look at it on your computer, because things might be a little shifted around, So just give it a quick check. So give yourself 15 minutes to just double check it on the computer, and then you'll be good to go. And I've done that quite a bit.
That's great. A few weeks ago, Jeff, you talked about why the iPad Air was probably going to be the better option for most people. This is the 5th generation, the one that it was just back in March, right? That Apple released this. You had this is your post that I brought up, but you also had a post from our friend David Sparks, who kind of went through and even just I think made some very even more simpler bullet points on David was talking about in this post that you linked to. He's got a lot of questions from folks saying, should I get the 11-inch iPad Pro, or should I get the new iPad Air, which is 10.9 inches or something basically similar to that?
Size,
yeah, pretty much the same size. I just love the fact that I think David and you, Mr. Jeff, are pretty much saying the exact same thing. Unless you really, really need just a couple of things on that iPad Pro, the iPad Air is more than enough for what you need.
Yeah, it was a nice. I enjoyed reading his short little article because it was a nice gut check. David has different experiences from me, and yet he comes to the same conclusion for many of the same reasons. And he talks about some things I didn't really talk about that much, like the camera system. For me, the camera system on an iPad is pretty much useless. So I don't really care which one has a better iPad. If I'm going to use a camera, I'm going to use my iPhone, not my iPad. But again, it's just another, if you're trying to decide. And I think part of the reason that the iPad Air compares so favorably to the 11-inch iPad Pro is that the 11-inch iPad Pro is a little bit older. At some point, maybe this fall, maybe next spring,
Yes.
Apple will update presumably the iPad Pro line, and that will leapfrog it, and there'll be a bigger gap between the two of them. I will emphasize, as I said in the past, though, I am a huge fan of that super big iPad, the 12.9 inch.
I know.
That is a reason to get the iPad Pro. But if you want the standard size that has been the iPad size pretty much since day one back in 2010, it's nice that you can save a little bit of money and get the iPad Air and really get all the features you need.
I'm thinking about upgrading my wife's iPad. I don't even think she has the older iPad Pro, but that's pretty much her computer, Jeff. Like, she doesn't even use a computer. Her iPad is where she handles everything. And so I've been wanting to upgrade her. So the biggest thing for her, and David mentions this, and you did too, is she has more colors. To pick
more color options
with the iPad Air. She loves purple, so there's a purple iPad Air, which you only get gray and silver, right, on the iPad Pro. But I got to tell you, when I was looking on the purchase, Jeff, you pointed this out as well as David did, is that with the iPad Air, you only have two options for the storage on this. You have 64 gig, which to me probably isn't quite enough. I would love to get her a 128 gig, but they don't even offer that. They jump all the way up to 256. Now, the iPad Pro, you've got, 5 different options or so that you can pick from, maybe 4. But anyway, she doesn't really care that much, other than, hey, honey, just get me enough storage so that I don't have to, run into problems. But I'm like, man, I'd really like to get that middle sweet spot, but they don't even offer that. And I know other people have talked about that. In fact, I think you linked to a story a few weeks ago from Dan Moren or somebody was talking about that, or Jason.
Same thing.
Snell. Yeah, which was the same thing on there. Interesting. But I will say, and I will point this out because I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but it is. The last thing is, the iPad Air does have a USB-C connector, right? Which is what the iPad Pro has. That's going to be something, again, this is for my lovely wife. Everything she's had up to this point has been Lightning adapters, right? Yeah. So that means not only do I have the expense of upgrading her to an iPad Air, but I've got to replace all of her cords because, she's got one upstairs and downstairs in different places. And it's like, I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's something that if I want it to be a seamless transition for her, I've got to make sure that it goes well.
It's a good point because I consider USB-C an advantage because you can charge more quickly and you can connect to more accessories.
Agreed.
Because I'm just a total geek about that stuff. But for folks that are just used to having a Lightning connector, it's a disadvantage to have to change connectors. So I guess it's all in perspective.
She doesn't even really care what the connector is, Jeff. That's the thing. Right. It's just like she'll get mad at me if she doesn't have access to the actual cord that she needs. She's like, why doesn't this work? Anyway,
I think that's your fault. That's fair to get mad.
I know.
That's Brett, how dare you change the port on my iPad?
I know. Here's an app that I know you like because back in May 2012, Jeff, you reviewed GoodNotes, and you and I have talked about this app a lot. In fact, I even had you on my Apps and Law podcast. Man, I don't even remember how long. That was a couple of years ago, where you did a fabulous job, I thought, of walking folks through how you use GoodNotes in your day-to-day operations. It is like, I just remember you mentioned it's always there. Instead of a yellow legal pad, you carry it. You can organize your notes. You can search your notes, even your handwriting. You first reviewed this in May 2012. I have always liked a very comparable app called Notability. You and I have talked about this many times, but you linked to a story from the GoodNotes developers that while the app has always been an amazing bargain for what, $7.99?
Yeah, $7.99.
Yeah, $8. They've now made it for free, at least for the first 3 notebooks. So I know you were happy to see this, and I was too. This is GoodNotes.
Yeah, that's great. Again, it's very simple. If you own an iPad and you have any sort of stylus, well, if you don't have a stylus, just get a stylus. You can get them cheap, or you can spend more for the Apple Pencil. But it's easy to get a stylus for an iPad. And if note taking could be any part of your life, you absolutely need to get GoodNotes. There's no reason not to try it out. And again, nothing against Notability, which you like, or some of the other ones. But now that it's free and you can get 3 notebooks, which will get them, that's basically 3 different projects, right? Because each notebook can have as many pages as you want.
Yeah.
Everybody has, no excuse not to download it and check it out and see how it works. I just cannot rave about it enough. I use it every day in my practice. I don't need to repeat myself because I've talked about it in the past, but it's like my iPad would not be what it is. I mean, it's like if my iPad couldn't support photos, it wouldn't be nearly as good. If my iPad did not have the GoodNotes app, it would not be nearly as good. It's a very key part of why my iPad is so useful in my law practice. Frankly, even so much fun. Sometimes I will take a crossword puzzle, and I'll just that I find somewhere like through the local newspaper website or something, and I'll just take a screenshot of it and I'll paste that screenshot into GoodNotes, and then I can just use my stylus and just do a crossword. But I use it for fun. I use it for work. The other day I was trying to figure out the what's the Wordle. I was trying to figure out Wordle, Wordle. With the 5 letters. And so I just took a blank piece of paper and I just wrote 5 blanks, and then I started writing. I was figuring out the Wordle, and then I was like, that's what the word is, haha. And then I went back to the puzzle and put it in. I use it all the time.
I love GoodNotes and I love Notability. I love both of it. And I tell people, you know what? Get them both. I mean, I think Notability is maybe $10, maybe even a little bit less. They've both been very comparable, and try them out. I love having both of these on here because sometimes, frankly, I like just the color compatibility within Notability, and Notability does have that one feature that you can see on the little logo of the app, that it can record and synchronize your notes at the same time. So I will use that sometimes when I'm at a conference, for example, Jeff. But for other things, GoodNotes is just I love just the simple layout of it, for example, and it's great. And both of these companies, I believe, are still independent developers. And I always tell people, like, these are the kind of folks that you really want to support. You want to support all developers. But I can see here GoodNotes was founded in 2011, so just a year later. Yui reviewed it. They've got a small team. I think they're based in Hong Kong and London, it looks here. And I love stories like this that, they started early on. That was only a year after the iPad was even introduced. Like, these are people that have been working on this for a very long time, and I always enjoy supporting them. So I'm glad you
and they support new Apple technologies. I mean, they do it all. So great app.
You had several stories this week about Apple TV, not just I always say this, right? Not just the actual little black box Apple TV, but the TV Plus service, which, man, we talked about this last week because Coda, that movie, which I still haven't watched yet, maybe this weekend, it won the Oscar, right, for Best Picture, which is just unbelievable that a streaming service did it. But man, everybody just talks about that movie. But there were several things here that you talked about today, from the Severance show. The Friday Night Baseball starts tonight. I think my son and I are going to watch that as well. Just some really good stuff here. Several stories that you linked to.
Yeah, and then stuff I didn't even link to. I mean, Apple, it seems like almost every day I'm seeing another story about an upcoming show on Apple TV Plus. I mean, the other day there was one that I saw that I think it's being made by some of the people behind Ted Lasso, which of course we all love. And they said that, one of the actors on the TV show is going to be Harrison Ford. I'm like, Harrison Ford? I mean, I don't think that Harrison Ford has been on TV since the Star Wars Christmas special in the 1980s. Right. I'm like, goodness gracious. Maybe I guess the Indiana Jones show. But so, I mean, and the Jason Momoa, who they already have in the C show, he's got another show. Every time I turn around, there's another big name actor or big name writer that is bringing another show. I mean, they are firing on all cylinders. But the things I linked to, like you said, baseball starts tonight, so that'll be interesting to see what Apple does with it. MLB, according to Jason Snell of Six Colors, a lot of the show is being put together, produced by MLB. So they may have more to do with all the interesting additions and new features. How is it going to be different watching baseball on Apple TV Plus as opposed to just regular television? They may have more to do with it than Apple, but I'm sure Apple's playing a role in it. The season finale is Severance, which is a show that I absolutely love and recommend to anyone who loves sort of mysterious shows. It's been so good, so good. So just some great stuff.
You talked here about the Hulu app now supports SharePlay. Now I guess that's on anything like with an iPhone or so. But I will tell you quickly one thing you linked to here, that the HBO Max app is being updated. I think, is it updated for Apple TV? Which I got to tell you, whatever they can do to improve it, because my wife has been watching the Friends show, which is an HBO Max, and for some reason I've tried updating everything. Like, the HBO Max app on the Apple TV will open and then it'll just close down.
Yeah, and it's got some bugs.
I cannot tell you how frustrating that has been. So whatever HBO or Apple or anybody can do to improve the HBO Max app, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and HBO announced this, last year, maybe even longer ago, because the current HBO Max app is based upon way back when HBO had two different apps. They had HBO Go, and then it had HBO. Was it called HBO Now? I forget. There was one if you subscribed to HBO through a cable provider, and there's one that if you didn't. And again, those were fine apps for their day, but they've just taken that same underpinning and just updated it, and there have been some bugs that haven't been fixed. So according to what they're telling Variety, they have a whole new platform. They started from scratch, so it should be much faster, much more efficient. Hopefully get rid of those bugs and have more features. So that'll be good. I mean, and I love the HBO Max app. I mean, I rave about Apple TV Plus on my website because it's an Apple thing. But in terms of the number of the streaming services that I use most often, HBO might be the one I use the most often. I watch a lot of shows on HBO. HBO has always had a lot of high quality shows. So I look forward to a better app on the Apple TV and the iPad and iPhone and everything else. So
I don't know if I would have subscribed to HBO Max separately, to be honest with you, although you have recommended some great shows on there that we've watched. But I, a few months ago, upgraded our AT&T service to sort of an unlimited data. I think we were traveling, so I wanted unlimited data to be. But anyway, all these carriers go through different phases when they make some offerings. And one of the things that came with the upgrade is I have access to HBO Max. There's different tiers you can do, but I've become pretty happy about having access to that. But I was just happy to see that was included.
I'm wondering if that's going to change, Brett, because I'm pretty sure that it was that HBO Max is being sold to Discovery, if I have that correct. I'm not 100% update.
I don't know.
I think that sale still has to be approved. But if it does, then Discovery is going to own HBO. And when HBO is no longer part of the AT&T / DirecTV family, I wouldn't be surprised if they stop that bundle. But we'll see.
I hope they don't make too many changes. A last story that you linked to here was scary, but encouraging and a nice public service announcement, all wrapped into one here. This was an incredible one. This is why I have the Alps, the Swiss Alps behind me. Why don't you explain this incredible story here, Jeff?
So Tim Blakely, who is far more physically fit than I will ever be in my entire life, 41 years old, personal trainer, has been snowboarding for 17 years.
Yes,
he goes snowboarding around the Alps, and he says in retrospect he probably should have had a friend with him, but he was solo by himself.
Yeah,
and
gotta have a buddy.
He fell into a crevice. I mean, what's scary is on your screen. Yeah, click right there. So this picture on your screen, he falls into a crevice and he can't get out. I mean, that's like falling down a well. I mean, it's like, oh my God, that's so scary. I'm probably even more scary with the snow because he fell onto some sort of a snowbank that might fall even more. And so he was stuck.
No, he called it a snow shelf.
A snow shelf.
To me, I just had this vision of I've got this narrow little strip of I guess some packed ice or something.
Oh my
that
goodness.
Could just go at any moment. I don't.
Just thinking about this gives me the heebie-jeebies. My goodness.
I know.
And so he's got his iPhone with him, but it's almost dead. It's got what did he say, 3% or something?
3%.
And so
yes.
What he manages to do is, thank goodness he knows that you can tell your iPhone to call, 911 or whatever the version is in Switzerland. And as I pointed out today in today's post, it's the way you do that is differently. So on an older iPhone, like apparently what he had, you press the power button, that one side button 5 times. On newer iPhones, you hold down both the power button and the volume up button at the same time. And when you squeeze it, when you hold both of those, it gets to that screen that has the little slider. But if you just keep squeezing it, it will automatically call 911. And it gives you a little countdown timer, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, just in case that's not what you intended to do, to give you a warning. But then it will call emergency services. And fortunately, the iPhone can tell them through GPS where you're located and they can come help you. So sometimes we share stories about how people use an Apple Watch, especially when with cellular, to do the same thing. But whether it's an Apple Watch or an iPhone, whatever it is, thank goodness he had this. So he was able to call emergency services. Then I guess he used some of that last 2% of power to take a picture of the crevice above him.
I know.
In case he never came out of it, people would know what happened.
Yeah.
But
I think in the other story you linked to, he said he had a battery pack in his backpack.
Oh, I didn't know that part. Okay.
But he was so nervous about he apparently he had to stay so still on this little snow shelf that he had to so slowly and gingerly try to access that battery pack that he couldn't get, he didn't want to do too many crazy movements. But so he was able to have the battery because I think he said in this other story, that he had to have the phone up and running long enough so that the bare minimum of a signal that he was getting, yeah, apparently up there in the Swiss Alps, it must have cell towers there too. But the bare minimum signal he was getting, he had to keep it going long enough for the emergency personnel to find him. Just wow, incredible. But I'm so glad that you linked to this, because it just gives us an opportunity again. We should remind people of this every single week, that there is that emergency SOS on your phone, and it can be triggered by simply holding the button. And I would also add, by the way, that we talked about this many times, Jeff, you should add your emergency contacts in here, because if you are unconscious or somebody finds you in a car wreck, all the emergency personnel know that they can pull up a phone. They can't unlock it, but if they hold the power button down, they can access your medical ID, which has important information about any allergies you have, as well as your emergency contacts. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in here that the iPhone will automatically text your emergency contact if your phone calls SOS on your behalf. And these are just critical things that are so beautiful. They're built into the Apple iPhone. You're going to have your iPhone with you, or your Apple Watch. You might as well take 10 minutes today to go to these. I'll have the links in the show notes, and set up your medical ID, and just make sure that you know how to do SOS on your phone and your watch.
Yeah, you want to do all this now while you're calm and collected, because in an emergency situation where you fall down the crevice or the well or whatever it is, or there are burglars in your house, you're not going to be thinking clearly, right? Your adrenaline's going to be running, jumping in. So you want to just you want to know instinctively, what do I do to get help, so that you can do it quickly.
And I think the Apple Watch will work as well, even if it's not a cellular watch. Am I right about that?
So, so if you hold down the big button,
iPhone.
Right. Okay. If you hold down the big button on the side of your Apple Watch, if you have an iPhone in range, so like if your iPhone is in your house, you're upstairs, your iPhone's downstairs, but you're both on the Wi-Fi of your house, then you can absolutely use your Apple Watch to tell your iPhone to call 911. If you are out, in the open, if you're camping or something like that, and you don't have your iPhone, all you have is your Apple Watch, well, then you're going to need to have cellular. And of course, you need to have cell service. So if you're completely off the grid, then it's not going to help you. But if you're someplace that has cell service, then your Apple Watch can help you out if you have the cellular. And I have heard people tell me that the only reason that they got the Apple Watch cellular model was just in case an emergency happened. And it's worth pointing out that even if you don't pay the $10 a month for the cellular service on an Apple Watch, as long as you have a cellular Apple Watch, you can still use it to call 911. They, even without charging, that part will work. So, so that's just something to keep in mind.
That's right. You've mentioned that before, Jeff. I'm glad you brought it up again. Even if you pay a couple of $100 extra, or maybe 150, whatever it is, to get a cellular capable Apple Watch, you could add it on to your current cellular carrier with your phone. But even if you don't, and it just has the cellular capability, it will still call 911 even without a plan in place. Oh, that's good to know. All right. So everyone, please take time, know how to use the SOS feature on your phone. Don't call 911 yet, but because you can cancel it, but just try it, do a test run, and then make sure you set up your medical ID. Time for In the Know. Here's a couple of tips on using the Files app. I think you're doing a similar tip on here, but this is something I included in a course that I created about managing files on your iPad. I'll link to that as well. It's mostly for lawyers. It's called iPractice on an iPad. But one of the things that you can do inside the Files app on your iPhone or your iPad is you can go up and go to a folder where you've got your files located. You can select files. So in the upper right corner, you can hit the little, I think sometimes it's a circle with 3 dots in it. And one of the options then will be select. You can tap the files that you want to combine into a PDF. I do this even if these individual files are PDF files or they're JPEG images or something similar. And if I select them, in the very bottom, I think it's the bottom right, there's a button that says more, or at least on the iPad. I usually do this on the iPad, but you can do it on the iPhone too. And it'll say create PDF. So it will basically combine or merge all of those files you selected into a single PDF file. And it really works great on there. Now, I'll be honest with you, Jeff, and you know this, I like using a different app, usually PDF Expert from Readle. I love using that. I think it has a better way that I can manage the merging of PDFs. But in a pinch, if I just want to create, send a file to somebody, maybe some pictures, and I want to send it as a PDF, I'll go into the Files app and I can access my Dropbox or my OneDrive from the Files app. It doesn't have to be on the iPad or the iPhone. And I will simply just say create PDF, and then I can send that. Now, typically it will create the PDF with those individual files in the order in which you select them. So if you want them to be in a different order, you have to do a little bit something extra. You just need to go in and rename those files first. So I usually just do a 01 dash, at the beginning of each file, and then it will put those files in that order. So just a little tip on using the Files app, which comes free on your iPhone and iPad. It's already there, and it will access your iCloud drive and any local files that you have. And then if you set it up correctly, it will actually allow you to connect to your Dropbox or your OneDrive or some other locations like that. And just knowing that there is this tip in there that you can create a PDF from multiple files is a neat thing in the Files app.
That's neat. I had no idea you could do that. That's very cool. Like you say, I've always used PDF Expert, but it's nice that there's something built in that can do it as well.
Absolutely.
So since you had a Files tip, I figured I would offer one too. And this is using the Files app to rename a photo. If you have a photo in your iPhone or iPad that you want to share, of course, it's easy to do. You can use the share button and you can share it through, a text message or an email or AirDrop or whatever you want to do from the Photos app. Absolutely.
Yeah, do that.
But when you do that, the file name is going to be something like IMG and a number after it.
Always.
And you can't change it. And Apple, when iOS 15 came out, Apple added the ability for you to change some of the metadata associated with the file. You can now change the location that a picture was taken, for example. You can now add a caption to it. But a caption is not the same as the file name. You can add a caption and call it Brett Burney, but when you send the file, it's still going to say IMG 1269 or whatever it is.
Exactly.
So sometimes when you're sharing a picture with somebody, you actually know it's going to be easier for that person to understand and to store it and to use it if you can change the file name of the picture to actually say, bluebird.jpg as opposed to something random. And so the simple thing is use the Photos app, share that photo into the Files app, and you're going to have to choose a place within the Files app to store it. You can just store it. One of the choices is right there on your iPhone or right there on your iPad. And then as you actually save it, you'll actually have right there a screen that says, what do you want to call this? And then you can give the file name whatever you want to call it, bluebird or redball.jpg, whatever it is. And then once you have the file saved, then you can share it with somebody else that has the file name. And so this is just really a way that you're making it more convenient and more accessible for the person that you're sending the file to. Now, I will point out that the Files app doesn't just rename photos. You can use the Files app to rename anything. Any kind of file. But I find it most useful for photos because if I'm working with PDF files, I'm probably working with a more sophisticated app like PDF Expert or, other types of files. If I'm working with the Microsoft Word file, you can save within Word and you can change file names within Word. Photos is the one type of file that I share frequently, but don't have a way in the built-in Apple app to change the title. So this isn't something I use a lot, but it's one of these tricks to keep up your sleeves and to know that you can use it. So that's my tip.
I do that all the time, and I hate that. It's like IMG _ number, and I'm like, okay, but I love doing that. Like nobody knows to look at a caption necessarily. I just want them to see the file, and that usually in the messages it pops up, with the picture obviously, and sometimes the file name on there. I think most of the time. This is brilliant. I will absolutely do this. In fact, I do this from my Mac all the time. I'll save, for the Photos app on my Mac and save it out. And it's always that way. Well, and I just immediately after I save it to a folder on my Mac, I'll go in and rename it. Like that's just second nature to me. Yeah. But doing it on my iPad and my iPhone, brilliant. Thank you, sir.
Now, if I'm on a Mac, there's actually another feature you can use, which is nice, that when you export, like let's just say if you have multiple files on the Mac, I can select 8 different pictures. Let's say that I go to an event with somebody, we go to, a concert together. And so I may take 20 pictures, but I might only want to send my friends 6 of them. So what I might do is select those 6 pictures and then save them out to my desktop before before I send them off, but you can choose to use a sequential file name. And I'll do that all the time. So I will select 6 pictures. And then when you save it, say, here's a sequential option so that they'll be called like, Bruce Springsteen 1, Bruce Springsteen 2, Bruce Springsteen 3. And then therefore, when you send it to your friend, it'll have, the correct, a name that makes sense to them, but with a little -1, -2, -3. That's a cool feature. You can't do that, to my knowledge, on the iPhone or iPad, but that would be nice if they added that in the future.
And this is good. Like you said, you can save from the Photos app into your Files app, and then you can save it into your iCloud Drive if you wanted, if you have enough space for that. Or nowadays, which this still boggles my mind, that we can save it. We have access to the local file system now. We can save it directly onto the iPad or the iPhone, which we know from the old days we weren't able to do. But it's a great place to save it. And then there's all kinds of things you can do. You can create a PDF out of multiple photos.
Do all sorts of stuff with it. Yeah.
Do all kinds of stuff. Thanks, Jeff. That's a brilliant tip. I like it. Great talking with you again, and we'll talk next week, Jeff. Thanks.
Thanks, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.